Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this week's Of the People. You might notice that there is a certain someone missing from your screen. Robert's got this week off, and so Benjamin and I, Lord Redic and I, decided that we would do a little best of episode and revisit some of our favorite guests that we've had on Of the People. So we're going to play you the clips, and then we're going to react. And let us know what you think in the comments. Who were your favorite guests? What were some of your favorite Of the People moments? All right. So like the multiverse is a victim of Kathleen Kennedy, so too is the American universe the victim of Joe Biden. Oh my God, you guys, I'm dying over here talking about this stuff. I hate these people.
Well, don't hate your opponent.
I know.
Hate corrodes, but I want to jump back to you because as you mentioned, it is Black History Month. And ladies and gentlemen, you are talking with Joe Pinion, who is the first Black candidate for United States Senate in New York in either party. So, Joe, you are part of Black History Month. You're a guy from Yonkers, right? You're
history.
What? You're part of history. Exactly, right? You're a guy from Yonkers, or did I get that right? It's Yonkers, right?
Yep. Yonkers, New York.
Yonkers, New York. But so I want to go closer to home to New York City. We're still staying with the immigration topic, but now you have Mayor Adams in New York City, where they're going to hand out debit cards for, I don't know, $1,000 a month, right?
It's a brand.
Right. And I guess
Our brand is chaos.
Well, our brand is incentive, right? I mean, if I'm going to get, I'm an illegal immigrant. I'm going to get free food and free lodging, and I'm going to displace American citizens and get free education. And by the way, when the Biden administration is moving around these illegal immigrants, we all know, or at least I know, what happens is they fly them to different locations, and there's a special line at TSA, which even if they choose to, they don't have to get there's no ID anywhere. Right? If you're an American, you need identification. But Joe, what's going on in New York City? Because to me, all that is going to do is incentivize more people to come here illegally, provided there's no more than 5,000 a day, right? I mean,
yeah. You need to tell us why your people are crazy, Joe. Tell us.
Right.
Well, and this is the argument and the fight that I get in with my fellow Republicans and my fellow conservatives. I don't think New Yorkers are crazy. I think New Yorkers are suffering under the tyranny of crazy people. If you talk to the average person in Brooklyn, and even if you expand it outside of New York, you talk to every day, not just the people on the streets of Chicago, but also the people in the lower chamber of the state legislature in Illinois. You have plenty of aldermen in Illinois talking about if you are going to be giving Black people anywhere the type of accommodations that the state of Illinois and Chicago is offering to migrants, we would have had a population boom a long time ago. Can you imagine how many people would have been moving back to places like Gary, Indiana, or people would have been moving back to Detroit if all of a sudden we just started handing out $53 million worth of debit cards? I'm seeing all these towns in Vermont who are trying to basically buy you a house and pay you to live there to become a nurse. You don't think that if you were handing out these debit cards in all those small forgotten towns of Vermont, we could have gotten people to move there? So yes, when you juxtapose that with what is happening in places like New York City, where you have Black and brown people to the tune of over 300,000 officially, by some estimates over 600,000 people living in public housing, that is $80 billion behind on repairs. I will repeat, $80 billion behind on repairs. That is not the national bill for public housing in the nation. That is the delinquent bill for public housing in New York City alone.
Wow.
Just the 5 boroughs. So if you're that person living in that building where the elevators don't work because we had 20,000 that broke down, where there's lead in the paint, and this is documented, where there is arsenic in the water, and this is documented, and you're walking through the streets of Manhattan and you see people rolling into the Roosevelt Hotel with 3 squares and also a debit card to boot, at some point something is going to be triggered in your mind saying, these people don't give you know what about us. Yeah. And I think that is where many people are. That is where the opportunity is for Republicans. We have to stop getting on Fox and Newsmax. I love them both, but we have to stop getting on TV and talking about what the Democrats have done. We must start going into communities and demonstrating what Republicans are willing to do in the name of making sure that, yes, we put Americans first, put the people who have made this country what it is first. And so if you're going to talk about Black history and all those great phrases used by all those great Democratic politicians, from Jesse Jackson to Barack Obama, hands that pick cotton will pick a president. What is the virtue of having hands that used to pick cotton picking a president if they represent a political party that does everything humanly possible to put your needs and your ambitions on the back burner? So I think, again, there is an opportunity for the conservative movement. There is an opportunity for the Republican Party to say you are getting a live demonstration of just how little these people think of you, of just how stupid they believe you to be, because they can do this in broad daylight and still ask you for your vote with a straight face.
Oh my God, Joe. It is one of the things.
Joe, you just triggered her. I just want you to know.
You got me. Now I'm going. Well, because it's, being in an interracial marriage, there's so much that, like, just being honest, as a white person from Vermont, there was a bunch of stuff I didn't know, right? Because I grew up very differently. And then what was so frustrating about the Black Lives Matter movement is that there are legitimate problems in Black communities in the inner cities, and all of the legitimate problems got overlooked because of the salacious, outrageous way people were talking about things. And listening to you share, 20,000 elevators, arsenic, lead, and we can't pay reparations.
Let's not forget failing schools that trap them in the cities as well, because the only path out, right, of poverty, regardless of race, creed, or color, is education.
Correct.
And
we all want our kids to be better, be more educated than we are.
Yeah, Flint, Michigan still has lead in the water.
Yep.
Right? We can't talk about reparations. We can't talk about fixing this stuff, but y'all are going to give $53 million in debit cards to people who aren't even Americans? No.
To that point, you talk about education, Robert. I have called it the education in this country is a civil rights issue of our time. What is happening in these public schools, it is disproportionately impacting minority students. In New York City right now, as we speak, we're at close to 75% of Black students not being able to do math at grade level. Right? 75%. That is not a typo. That means only around 26% of the Black students are capable of doing math at grade level. The rest of them don't know what. Across the state, we're looking at close to 60% of all children, all colors, all creeds, unable to read at grade level at a time when those fundamental tools for education are going to mean more than ever as we head into an automation era where they're going to have to be able to articulate more so than have a particular competence for coding or whatever, what exactly it is they're trying to solve from a problem-solving standpoint, right? So specificity of language is going to have a great impact on all the things that we do on a day-to-day basis moving forward. And none of it is happening because, to your point, they are so focused on dividing us. They are so focused on being anti-racist that they have ushered in some of the most racist and bigoted policies we have seen in a lifetime. Even if you look at what happened with Senator Tim Scott in the aftermath of his presidential race, or I would say in the winding final days of his campaign for president, where he proposed to an individual that he had been dating, and the way that he was spoken about, just by virtue of the fact that they knew they could get away with it, because he was a Black Republican, and the Black community would let him get away with it because the person that he had chosen to propose to was not a Black person themselves, but a white woman who happened to be a conservative. And so these mainstream media that loves to wrap themselves in the patina of respectability allowed the only Black man in the United States Senate who was a Republican to be savaged in ways that they would never accept under any
Nope.
other conditions. And so now we have built this world where there is only one way to be black. There's only one way to be a black ally. And you know how you know that has become the case? Because now, even on places like Harvard University campuses, and even on places like the University of Pennsylvania campuses, you have Jewish students hiding in libraries for their life, because the same Jewish people who were basically risking their lives side by side with black people who are buried in shallow graves as we speak that will never be discovered in the name of riding for freedom are now being told that their allyship is insufficient. And the only way for them to be a good ally is to side with Hamas, who doesn't think any Jewish people should exist anywhere.
Yeah,
that is the America that is being built right before our very eyes.
They basically are creating racists. It's like, it's okay for you to be a racist against people we don't agree with. First of all, right? They're like sanctioning racism against political opponents, and then creating racists by all like the border nonsense, and then just talking smack about each other and being so ugly. It's creating division where there doesn't need to be.
It's not creating division. It's fomenting division that was already there, right? I mean, you've got to sort of step back from all of this. When you look at, right, let's go, you had mentioned Martin Luther King, right? The I Have a Dream speech where I to want to live in a country where I'm judged by the content of my character and not the color of my skin. You juxtapose that with the Black Panthers movement, and the reason I bring that up is because basically Black Lives Matter is sort of a modern day version of the Black Panthers movement, including adopting their 10 or 14 points strategy, right, or belief position. And now it's like an Alice in Wonderland, right? If you don't judge people based on identity politics, then you are a racist. And by the way, as a white person, you have systemic racism. You're born racist and you can't help yourself. So they have made everyone into a victim. And let's not forget, social justice or justice is always rear-facing. It's who to blame and how to make reparations or fix the problem. And freedom is always forward-facing, Ericka. So they're dividing us because if they can divide us, it's easier to stay in power. And to me, I'm cynical. I'm from New Jersey. We all know that. It's all about staying in power. Joe, what say you?
It's 100% about power. And to the point where, here's what I always say. I don't get to tell you what to believe, but I do get to demand you be consistent. And even if you look at what has happened here, it was Malcolm X, of all people, who warned us that the northern white liberal was more dangerous than the southern segregationists, calling them the northern fox to the southern wolf. And yet somehow when these people try to embrace the mantle of black power, they ignore that fact, right? It was the old saying, from Huey P. Newton and Stokely Carmichael, power It does not flow from the sleeve of a dashiki, it flows from the barrel of a gun. And yet somehow these are the same people who, in the name of black power, have sided with northern white liberals who try to unilaterally disarm law-abiding citizens, whom black women are the fastest growing segment of new legal gun owners, because it's our communities disproportionately that have been turned into a shooting gallery by virtue of this ridiculous radical defund the police movement brought to you by the Marxists masquerading as people concerned for Black Lives to Matter. So yes, I think it is purely about power, and it has always been about power. And the time has come for minority communities to recognize that the power is vested in them. It is not vested in those who pretend to speak on their behalf.
That's right.
And I would argue that until the black community, any minority community, but until the black community understands that the Democrats have been using them as one of the pillars of their support without really, the black community did they benefit under Obama's policies? Not that I saw. Is the black community benefiting under the Biden policies? Not that I saw. But it does come down to votes matter and elections matter. So it's going to be interesting to see, given the rise of illegal immigration, which in New Hampshire was the #1 issue, and yes, we're a border state, but the focus is on the southern border, how that affects the black community's vote towards presumably who Donald Trump will be the nominee on the Republican side versus whether it's Joe Biden or somebody else.
Look, I think to that point, right, it's, if you take your Republican hat off, right, and just try to look at things from a logic standpoint, right, is it logical for someone to arrive at the conclusion that a vote for this party is going to benefit them? Well, if you look at somebody who was, I call the not in my backyard northern white liberal crowd, perhaps it does benefit them to vote for Democrats if their main concern is being absolved of any guilt for how they're acting in the present. And that's what happens when Democrats line up and start talking about reparations for things that people that died long before they were born are responsible for, right? When New York State is talking about reparations, even though clearly it is a northern state where it is not responsible for the transgressions of history, right? So there's that perspective. If you're looking at the LGBTQ community, or however many letters have been added now, there is a very real argument to be made that even just in my adult lifetime, by the pushing of Democrats, there has been marriage codified at the federal level, and certainly before that at the state level for gay marriages. There are now laws being codified to effectively strip parents of rights to make sure that children can transition without their permission. You could make the argument that there are policies being passed that if you are someone that subscribes to that type of mindset, that would benefit you. You get to the Black community, you get to the Hispanic community, people who are here legally, I don't know how you make such a compelling argument. In fact, it goes the opposite way, right? There are schools in New York City right now where there is not a single Black child reading or doing math at grade level, right? That's a real thing. And these schools have not been decertified because we don't have the means or we don't have a method in place to decertify them. You go to places like Maryland, Baltimore, where we know, statistically speaking, over 70% of the high school students are reading at an elementary school level. This is child abuse that is being perpetuated by the people that you are voting for. And the only thing they have to say in their own defense is we're not spending enough money, even though in New York City alone, we're spending $38,000 per child. How much more money do you need? So, yeah.
It's because meritocracy is no longer, we don't want to be the best. We want to make everyone equal, and we want to solve the problems of the past, and it's racist to believe in meritocracy. And
here's
apparently, or any other of the things that they have just unilaterally labeled as racist. I'm pretty sure breathing is going to be next.
Hey, Joe.
Oh yeah, you definitely.
We're all
the
racist
white people are definitely polluting the oxygen. Oh my God, I love it, you guys. And you know what else I love? You, Joe Pinion. You have been an awesome guest here on Of the People. We thank you so much for joining us this week. What fun. Love your perspective, and also love to hear what's going on up in the Northeast as a fellow Yankee myself. So thank you, Joe, for coming on this week. Where is the best place for people to go follow you? Is it Twitter? Is it YouTube? Where can they check you out?
Yeah, people can find me on Twitter, Joseph Pinion, one word, Pinion. They can find me on Instagram. I am Joe Pinion. They can go to joepinion.com. But look, I think all of these issues that we talked about simply highlight the fact that we cannot afford another 4 years of Joe Biden. We didn't even talk about the things that are happening beyond our border. This man has been sleepwalking our country to the precipice of a third world war. You look at what's happened with Iran, you look at what's happened with Russia and Ukraine, you look at what's happening in the South China Sea, and you look at the fact that the banker for all of this carnage occurring around the world has been a Chinese Communist Party that has gone unchecked by Joe Biden or the Democrats' United States Senate. It'll all be fun and games until 40-year-old sons and daughters get letters in the mail saying that they must report for duty, because that's where we are right now with the tragic under-enrollment and lack of preparedness for our military. We're about 1 foot away from that. So this election is critical. I, again, believe that America will always endure, but will America endure in the fashion that we are accustomed to it? I don't know if that's the case if we give this man, Joseph Robinette Biden, another 4 years at the helm. So again, get out, vote, focus on those local elections, those state legislatures that are critical, those congressional seats are critical, a state senate in New York that we have to try to take back. I'm sure it's the same in New Hampshire. So get active, folks, because you got one shot to save your country.
Socialism. The goal of socialism is communism. The world is quite familiar with socialism and the horrors socialism has brought with it. It wasn't that long ago. Actually, it's still with us. Socialism creeps into government slowly until it's too late. Socialism, the big lie. Yes, it could happen anywhere. This educational video was brought to you by the American Center for Education and Knowledge and paid for by people like you who care about the future of our democracy. Please help us continue our work educating the American public and consider supporting ASIC by making a tax-deductible donation at asicfund.org.
I don't know about you, Lord Redic, but Joe Pinion was one of my very favorite guests that we've had on. He's just throwing haymakers.
Yes. It was constant bombs.
I think that one of the things that struck me the most about revisiting this clip is how much worse it's gotten in New York in only a few months. As bad as it was then, it's even worse now. So, our brand, New York, Mayor Adams, what is your brand now?
New York has a brand. It is chaos.
So Joe Pinion, he's talking about how the dereliction of duty that we're seeing from New York politicians, from people in charge, whether it's New York City or Albany, these people suck. They are not for you. They're definitely not for Black people.
When you listen to the types of policies that are being put in place, it definitely sounds like people who are more interested in doing some kind of experiment and just seeing if their idea of the world could work. Against all odds, against all science, reason, history, things that people clearly know don't work.
Yeah.
Like I don't know where letting crime happen has ever made crime decrease.
And the idea that we're not only are we gonna just not prosecute crimes, but we're actually going to participate in it by, safe injection sites, safe supply, Narcan, machines, vending machines, all that stuff. Like, well, see, you're actually like enabling it.
Well, some of those things I could see where people are trying to say, well, if my drug addiction's a sickness, the Narcan could save a life if something's going on, that maybe if we do this, it'll cause them to not have to do crimes to get the drugs. I could maybe see the logic or the libertarian argument of allowing people to do what they want to do with their bodies. From that perspective, I could maybe see how you land there. But like when people commit crimes, we're not going to keep them in jail.
Yeah.
Do what you want. Sperry was talking about.
Yeah, do what you want with your own body. But once you infringe on, once you're messing with my stuff or taking money out of my pocket to pay for it.
Well, yeah, but like when Ericka Sperry was talking about, was that New York where they did dismember the corpses?
Oh, yeah. The bail reform.
Right. So,
oh, my God. Yeah.
So when you get into that part of the utopia, it's just like, where have you ever seen that work well? The only time I've ever seen criminals just pretty much able to do whatever they want to is in prison.
or the purge.
And as a man, the stories I've heard about prison don't sound like a utopia. I don't know about the female prisons, but the male prisons sound like a blank hole. So,
oh, yeah. The female prisons, too. Don't let them lie to you.
And so basically what's funny is that Joe Pinion talking about this, if any of you guys have seen Fallout, nuclear war, Holocaust, and then they have these different little communities underground, these bunkers, and each bunker has like a different experiment going
Oh,
on.
right.
Like different rule sets to determine.
Yes.
And so everybody gets to try to play God. That's what New York, California, and Vermont remind me of. Speaking of Fallout.
Oh my
24.
gosh, it's so true. They really are. And you know what? The best part is there's immediate evidence, okay? I remember covering New York's bail reform on my podcast Generally Irritable a couple of years ago when they were first doing it. And it was like you saw the list that they were removing from bail, and it was violent crimes, sexual assault, domestic violence, like gun charges, right? For being so anti-gun, they were letting off people with gun charges.
I don't get that at all.
And so you just see this. It doesn't take long for the socialist, communist, bull utopian morons. It doesn't take long for their ideas to come crashing down and go terribly wrong.
Yeah.
All right. So next up, we're going to check out Jaco Bouillon here in Texas. He is doing yeoman's work on the border and trying to protect kids and people from human trafficking. So let's watch one of our favorite clips from that interview.
Yeah, look, not politicize the issue, because we go to save every child. We don't ask, what's the child's orientation or where they're from, or even if the child agrees with me and my faith. It doesn't matter. But we also have to become intellectually honest in America again. We can't deny truth, absolute truth. And the truth is that the current administration is doing practically nothing. Almost nothing. I mean, actually retroactively being destructive to some of the policies and pillars that were built over the last 10 years. So this current administration has set a precedent, which then, remember, when a federal administration sets a precedent, it trickles down into state government.
Right.
And we're seeing now the rollback of some safeguards that we fought for a decade for to be put in place in states like California that have now been destroyed, such as California canceling the sex offender registry. So
What?
You don't know when you buy. Yeah, it's canceled. Gavin Newsom canceled the sex offender registry of California. So when you take a stance at a White House level, so goes the leadership, so goes the nation. And so you're giving liberty to some of these radical factions, maybe in state government, local government, independent school districts, to be radicalized, and it actually is very destructive for the fight against child sexual exploitation.
Well, and that's one of the things people said that that when the previous administration or in previous administrations, when they were separating children from their families, not holding them in camps or things like that, part of the point of that policy was to make sure that those kids were not being trafficked. And so they wanted to make sure that whatever adult they came over here with was actually a family member, that they actually belonged to them. And now the Biden administration has apparently lost 85,000 undocumented children just into the country somewhere.
Yeah, I'm so glad you look again. We're just speaking to truth here. Here's the truth. President Obama deported more people than President Trump. President Trump is the president with the most focus on security and border, and the only president in U.S. history that acknowledged that children are being sold for sex. He acknowledged that from the Oval Office. He formed task forces. He appropriated funding, brought the NGOs in, and did incredible work. The cages that they said, President Trump put children in, those facilities were built by President Obama as part of his deportation program. President Obama correctly took a child and a father, a supposed father, separated them for 45 minutes to an hour. You ask the same set of questions of both to corroborate the story, to see, is this child, in fact, this man's child? They reunite them. Trump reunited them, but you must, at the border, separate, interrogate, ask questions. None of that's happening. It's illegal now by Biden initiative. It's illegal for CBP on the border to question a man, to ask him whether it is his daughter or not. There's no questioning going on. Zero. There's no questioning going on the border. There's no search and verify. There's no going. most of the drugs, the fentanyl that's coming into the U.S. is coming in through the backpack of a human slave, of a sex traffic victim, because they're not allowed to search. They're not allowed to frisk. They'll call it apprehension. And I go to the border. I mean, goodness gracious, we were shot at the border. We do a lot of work there. They'll bring them in, they'll sit them down, they'll make a phone call, a white bus shows up, and they're transported to an NGO. Health and Human Services, by law, is supposed to examine every child that's crossing the border to see if they have a medical condition. Are they malnourished? None of that's happening. HHS is nowhere to be found on the border. You don't know what disease is coming in. Has the child been raped in transit through the Darien Gap? Because most of them have been sexually exploited. 60% of women and children are sexually exploited prior to arriving to the border. None of that is happening. So to compare the two administrations from a perspective of, are we protecting human dignity and human life, and are we preventing bad characters from sexually exploiting women and children? The previous administration, absolutely. The current administration, absolutely not.
Well, and that's the thing that to me is so frustrating is, you know, you hear these politicians saying, oh, you know, they're coming from these devastated countries and we need to help everyone. And, oh, what does the Statue of Liberty say? And you go, okay, yeah, that's cool and all, but you also are now incentivizing the very criminals that are guaranteed to harm the people that you say you're trying to help.
Look, I'll say this to you. Can you imagine? And this is number one, it's lies. The White House has not acknowledged not one time since 2020 that children are being sold for sex, yet they have all the evidence. They know of all the children that have died, the bodies buried. They know of the rape trees. They understand. They know. They have all the intel. They look the other way because the political motive is different. The end justifies the means. If Karine Jean-Pierre, the press secretary of the United States government for President Biden, if Karine Jean-Pierre tomorrow morning stood up in the White House press room and said the following: President Joe Biden had an epiphany last night, and he came to the understanding that children are being sexually abused and raped and sold as commodities by the cartel. Do you know what would happen? The American public would demand for the border to be controlled and shut down. So they don't do it. They don't do it because it doesn't play into the cheap labor movement. It doesn't play into the trilateral agreement that Joe Biden signed with Spain and Mexico, where he said we will take 7 million migrants before the end of his term. It doesn't play into the Davos crowd and the World Economic Forum movement of moving people. When people move, children are sexually exploited. That's why the Super Bowl is the #1 sex trafficking day of the year.
Right, because they bring in the prostitutes and their children. Right.
So you're moving millions of people from 180 countries around the world into our country, and you're going to want the American people to believe that nobody is sexually exploited? Come on. They know if they were to acknowledge it, the general public would demand action.
You know, I grew up in New Jersey, and we have an expression within the community that a fish rots from the head down. Are you tired of seeing your rights stripped away by the politicians in Washington who don't care about you or me? Do you feel like you're a red dot alone in a sea of blue, disconnected? Well, it's time to get connected. The American Center for Education and Knowledge is fighting back to defend American exceptionalism. Go to acecfund.org to learn more and get connected. That's ACEKFUND.org. Do it now.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. More reasons not to trust your government. The government failing, sucking at its job. Yeah, that's why we wrote. That's what you guys.
Book exists.
That's why we wrote the book, Reasons to Trust the Government. And yes, it is a blank book because there are no reasons to trust the government. So,
both the Jaco and Joe's videos show you how little we can depend on the people that we've vested the power into.
Mm-hmm. We've given them authority to protect us, and they're refusing to do it.
They're doing literally the opposite of protecting us.
Can you believe that when he said that they're like making it so you can't ask questions and they're not separating people? I mean, the Biden administration is literally colluding, and I know that's not the right word to use, but they're basically colluding with human traffickers. And I want to believe it's not on purpose, that these are not just nefarious actors who want people to be abused. But man,
I mean,
you're either stupid or evil. I don't know.
The deal is I try not to, I forget what is it? Not Hanlon's razor. Hanley is simple.
Occam's razor.
Occam's razor is simple. Hanlon's, I think, is the malice where stupidity would suffice.
Yep.
I don't think that they're stupid. I just think that their interests don't lie in the same place as the American people's. And so,
yeah,
no matter what they do, obviously the criminals are going to try to do something to capitalize off of it. I think that they know they're doing that and just don't care because their agenda matters that much to them.
Yeah, it was like that guy when we had the conversation at the party who said, I don't care that women are going to lose their opportunities because inclusion is his most important value.
Correct.
So people being hurt is just a unfortunate side effect of initiating the policy. And so that, I mean, that tells you a lot that these people who say that they care about you, who say that they have your best interests at heart, who say they love you, they love the people, loving on the people, like Miss Tiffany Henyard, okay? They're not, because they are fine with hurting people in order to achieve their agenda.
But I want to be clear, everybody to some extent is fine with that. That's what
true.
Tucker Carlson was talking about with presidents. All presidents, take lives. What they're saying is that I'm going to protect my people, whoever I think my group is.
That's right. And I think that's also why we're seeing now with the new protests against Israel and stuff like that, that whole coalition falling apart, because they're not going to stick up for you and your thing. They're only going to stick up for themselves and their thing. Yep. And further to that point, love James Lindsay, friend of Generally Irritable, our channel. This guy's awesome. We love him. One of the biggest brains I know. And we're going to be listening to him again talk with us about cultural Marxism and the absolute nonsense that we're seeing on college campuses now.
So talk a little bit about high-level cultural Marxism. I mean, I love the paper, The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct, which I assume is sort of that toxic masculinity trope that, that the left throws around. But talk more broadly about what is cultural Marxism.
Well, we'll start here. The Southern Poverty Law Center says, through his multiple communication channels, Lindsay continues to spread his various conspiracy theories and aversion to what he deems as, quote, wokeness. Most of his rhetoric focuses on the specter of cultural Marxism/communism, a supposed white genocide, and the alleged indoctrination of children by sinister forces. And so that didn't really say a lot about what cultural Marxism is. I think they mentioned it again somewhere. His concentration on combating communism and cultural Marxism in America earned him prominence in the reactionary anti-student inclusion movement. I don't know what that is. That rapidly gained traction through the country at the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's not very helpful, but I did just want to highlight that the Southern Poverty Law Center seems to think that it's important that I'm fighting against this. As a matter of fact, I've been listed as a conspiracy theorist on my Wikipedia, for example, specifically for talking about cultural Marxism. So cultural Marxism is a interesting thing. I apologize that this is going to require a little unpacking, and I hate when things require that. It's not that hard to understand, but there's this weirdness around it. There are a variety of names for a school of thought that arose in the 1920s and 1930s to address the problem that the Bolshevik Revolution only took place in a peasant society, which was exactly the opposite of where Marx said it would work. Yeah. And it would not take place in the West. And one of the architects of this school of thought, who is named Antonio Gramsci, was frustrated that the Italian workers' parties would not unify amongst themselves and trigger a communist revolution in Italy. He was also frustrated that they wouldn't unify with the workers' parties in other countries and internationally, and were in fact most enthralled by the nationalistic aspects of these parties in the first place, the Italian part. And so he was frustrated about this. And of course, that is where the birth of the fascist movement really kind of came from. And so
Right.
he was trying to write a analysis to explain why it is that, for this so-called school of thought, to explain why it is that Marxism was taking hold in the wrong places and not in the places predicted by Marx, by means not predicted by Marx. And so Lenin was taking over a bunch of peasants by promising them they'd be able to get better work, as opposed to workers rising up and saying work is exploitative and we're going to overthrow our oppressors and seize the means of production. And then thirdly, to understand why it's just not happening in the West overall. So that school of thought is sometimes referred to as Western Marxism. It is sometimes referred to as cultural Marxism, because his answer was that the West had robust cultural institutions that produce and transmit values that repel communism. And in particular, he named 5 cultural institutions, and those were religion, family, education, media, and law, were all in the West attached to Western values, and were transmitting and promoting and maintaining Western values that excluded communism. And so his strategy was to do cultural subversion by entering into those, or infiltrating, I really should say, those cultural institutions, and creating a new way of thinking. He called it a counter hegemony. I'm trying not to use too many big words. Within the institutions that would then promulgate new cultural values out to transform the society from within, so that a communist revolution would be fruitful eventually. And so this is sometimes called cultural Marxism, but the communists, being very savvy operators, claim that cultural Marxism is a dog whistle for disliking Jewish people, that it's an anti-Semitic dog whistle, because many of the people that were involved in the building of Western Marxism were in fact Jewish, or at least they were people who claimed to be Jews, one way or the other, or they had Jewish parentage or something of this kind. What binds them together is not their religion, but rather that they were communists, as evidenced by the fact that they were also big fans later of Mao Zedong, who is famously not very Jewish. It turns out he's sort of Chinese.
Point.
So Western Marxism, or cultural Marxism, is a school of thought that was architected by Antonio Gramsci in Italy, George Lukács in Hungary primarily, and then the Frankfurt School, which developed obviously in Frankfurt, Germany, at the University of Goethe in Frankfurt, and which was originally called the Institute for Marxism, but then they changed it to the Institute for Social Research so that it would kind of be a little under the radar. And so if you go, for example, now to Wikipedia and you type in cultural Marxism, it'll direct you to a page called Cultural Marxism Conspiracy Theory. This was not true 5 years ago, or even 4 years ago. I don't know exactly when that changed, but I remember that it did. But you can now, there is a link that will take you to the old page that explains that there's this whole school of thought that thought to use Marxist conflict-based stratified class analysis across cultural issues, cultural infiltration and subversion, in order to prepare the West to be taken over in a communist revolution, which was going to take complete values subversion and inversion to accomplish. That also explains the aspect of it that is actually a conspiracy theory, that is the Jews run everything and they created communism in order to be able to subvert the West because they want to be, whatever Jewish destruction, Tikkun Olam, or whatever the hell Olam that they say it is.
Tikkun Olam.
Yeah, you can see I'm super versed and interested in this. So
Got it.
So cultural Marxism is a school of thought. Maybe it's better, just to avoid this stupid SPLC horse, to call it Western Marxism. It has definitive fathers who wrote copiously. George Lukács very famously wrote a very, I think, accessible, given that it's communism, book in 1923 called History and Class Consciousness, that lays out what became a lot of Western Marxism. Antonio Gramsci wrote this stuff down in what are collected in what's known as the prison notebooks, which span over 3,000 pages that he wrote in prison after the Italian fascists threw him in prison to, quote unquote, stop his brain from working for 20 years. He died in prison 11 years later. So his brain only ended up not working for 9 of the years, and for the other 11, he wrote 3,000 pages of some of the most influential
Wow.
communist doctrine ever written in secret in his prison cell. And so these are known architects. The Frankfurt School arises in 1920-ish, 23-ish, something like that, massively funded, and
Yeah.
grows in influence. And its early members are like Max Horkheimer and Walter Benjamin, and all these are people with names who wrote books with their names on them. It's like it's not hard to see what the line of thought or school of thought is. And then eventually, Horkheimer and Marcuse and Adorno, who are big prominent members of the Frankfurt School, Erich Fromm, all Hitler takes a chancellorship in the 30s in Germany. They're like, we better get the hell out of Dodge. And so they were brought to the United States to get asylum from Hitler's fascist regime. And the United States decided that these people that are like blatant cultural subverters needed to be brought into major institutions like major universities, Brandeis, Columbia, UCLA, UCSD. Maybe one of them ended up in Berkeley for a while. I can't remember. And then also Herbert Marcuse gets stuck in the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA. So this is who's building out the thing that becomes our CIA in the 1940s, if you can imagine. So cultural Marxism is a school of thought that says we're going to use cultural analysis to try to transform the values of the West to make it more fruitful to communism.
So that's where we start. So cultural Marxism basically is like the foundation and the undergirding of all of the separation that we see happening, where you have the the theories, or the oh my goodness, what's the you know
Critical race theory, queer
e-
theory, that kind of stuff.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the foundation of all of that stuff,
Yeah, so
where
what was going on, Gramsci had this idea of cultural infiltration and subversion, and that was big. And then Lukács had this idea, who I mentioned, the Hungarian, had this idea that actually class consciousness is an educable thing. It's graduated. It's not like you just wake up one day and you have class consciousness. There are stages of learning, and it can be taught. And so you have this emphasis of bringing it into education and teaching people what it means to have class consciousness. It's not just by getting ranted at by Marxists and reading their books that all of a sudden you're going to have it. There was actually an educational mode that this is the 3rd chapter of History and Class Consciousness for anybody who wants to go read it then for themselves, where he's laying it out. And then the mode of analysis of the Frankfurt School was particularly how is culture produced and how do we subvert the production of culture. And so you have, for example, Theodor Adorno, who I mentioned, being excessively angry about jazz music, saying that jazz was its own form of cultural rot and subversion. And so he had these long things he wrote about how he didn't like jazz music and how this was, indicative of maybe Weimar kind of mentality that would degrade the culture and lead to the fascist catastrophe. And then you had them talking about what they called the culture industry. So they talked about the way that culture and thus, in fact, you as a person, who you think you are in the West and advanced capitalism, is commodified and sold to you. So you are sold through advertisements an image of who you think you're supposed to be, and that person happens to drink Coca-Cola, so you'll go buy Coca-Cola. And so the culture industry became the target of their analysis. In the 1960s, they became frustrated because they realized they are not going to motivate people on economic means, and the cultural analysis was too abstract. And so Marcuse extremely clearly writes down that what has to happen is that we have to abandon the working class as the proletariat revolutionary class and move into different modes of cultural analysis where there is what he called the vital energy for revolution. And that vital energy was to be found, he said, in the ghetto populations, racial minorities, sexual minorities, feminists, and outsiders, who are to be brought together and cobbled together and then enlightened to the concrete nature of their oppression through college students who are being indoctrinated in the schools that they had already infiltrated. This was explicitly written down in One Dimensional Man in a repeated short form it was 64 and 65, his essay Repressive Tolerance. He mentions it, but it's laid out in pretty heavy detail in his 1969 essay, that's a essay on liberation, Counter-Revolution and Revolt. Instructs the wholesale infiltration of professions and the entire professional class So that's Marcuse's writings from 64 to 72 laying this plan out. And he was an
So
extraordinarily influential leftist at the time.
now that sounds like when you say that like sexual minorities, racial minorities, basically that that was the Obama coalition that was formed to get him elected president. It was
Well, that
like
all
if
makes
we
sense.
right, so if we take all of the people who feel slighted basically and market to them that we're all one group, even though on paper some of these groups might not otherwise get along, but there's a big gap of time between when we're talking about the 30s and the 60s and 70s and 2000s when Obama gets elected. So that is is it like, do we think that there was a concerted intentional effort to degrade and erode all of these institutions in order to get there?
Yes.
Or is it just that it just happened over time? Like,
Also, yes, but both of those things were happening. So this was being infused into the culture, but is primarily being infused into the culture through education. Entertainment started catching on later. McCarthy was not wrong about the communist influences in Hollywood, but it was primarily being infused into the culture through education. And there was a concerted effort for them to get into education at all levels. That's a direct quote from Marcuse in Counter-Revolution and Revolt in 1972. And the
okay.
goal, and so you bring up Obama. None of this is abstract. None of this is like just mystery conspiracies floating out in the air. I bring up Marcuse. We'll get to Obama. Watch this. So Marcuse had all these ideas, and he pushed all these ideas into the university at every level. And the university system, for whatever reasons, maybe Shelby Steele is one of the most enlightening writers on this issue, was caving into this leftist agenda over and over and over again through the 60s and 70s. Massive amounts of white guilt, or whatever, as Shelby Steele attributes it to. They were taking it up. They were building out women's departments or women's studies departments. They were building out race studies departments. They were building out ethnic studies. Became law in 67 or 8 or something like that in California to have ethnic studies education at the UC system. And so they were building out this educational apparatus, because if you get the education system, you train the students, thus you get the future professionals, and the future professionals shape the world. And so it's pretty clear how this works. But one of Marcuse's students specifically was Angela Davis. It was one of his PhD students. And Angela Davis went on to help found this thing called the Combahee River Collective, which was a collective of Black feminist socialist lesbians who were the first ones to lay out this kind of intersectional idea that all of the forms of oppression are interlinked: sex, class, race, sexuality, and so on. And that it has to be understood in that way, which later got codified by Kimberly Crenshaw. Well, Kimberly Crenshaw was a PhD student. She's the one famous for so-called intersectionality. She named it. She's considered also the founding mother of critical race theory, which she also named. But she was a PhD, or doctoral, I guess it's JD probably, student, I don't know which doctorate it is, of Derek Bell, who is credited as actually the father of critical race theory. Derek Bell was a mentor of Barack Obama, who was teaching him the same exact legal theory before that. And Obama held Bell up and honored him. More than that, the same strategy was implemented by the dying radical guard, not dying in the physical.
Hey everybody, Ericka Redic, also known as Generally Irritable. Special shout out and thanks to our Of the People radio and podcast listeners, and to our Rumble viewers. We've sort of had to give up on YouTube a little bit because they don't like the things that we say. So you guys make sure you go check us out on Rumble. And also, while you're there, go ahead, click subscribe, follow Generally Irritable. You hear Robert and I talk about it a lot, and you might ask yourself, what's the difference? Well, at Generally Irritable, we're not just covering news and politics, but we're talking about how news and politics intersects with culture. We get to go to live events like the How Many More rally at the Austin Capitol, America Fest hosted by Turning Point USA, talk to and interview some of your favorite pundits, politicians, and podcasters to see what they think about where we are at in the American experiment today. Why do we do it? Because we believe that an engaged and informed electorate is the best way to save the American Republic. You'll even find cameos from our producer, Lord Benjamin, aka Lord Violence, aka A Darker Perspective. That's where you can find him on Twitter. You can find me on all of the socials under Generally Irritable, literally all of them. Twitter, you're going to find me as Ericka Redic, ERICKAREDIC. And most importantly, engage, because we need you to overcome the evil big tech overlords. You got to share, you got to comment, you got to like, you got to hit that rumble button.
Wow.
My mind always feels like it's melting after I talk to James.
It's so much information. Talking to him and Bruce at the same time, that's the dream. I want to get those two
Dream team
in a room to just nerd out.
I would love that. Oh my God, get them talking about Marxism and the stuff going on in the Middle East right now.
Yeah,
They'd probably, anyway.
And the concept of when you start talking about Marxism and intersectionality and the origins of a lot of these things, now you're looking at stuff with knowing that there were Jewish professors that were part of that plan. And now we're seeing the end result of it being, it's going bad and it's not going well for them.
Yeah.
That sucks.
Yeah. But the Marxism cannot allow for dissent. That's the thing that's funny is like the murdering of tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people in, China, North Korea, Russia, all that stuff. That's a feature, not a bug. Okay? Because if you dissent, if you don't go along with it, you have to be gotten rid of. Like that's part of the plan. If you don't go along to get along, you get on out.
Well, I mean, whenever you're talking about things like communism and socialism, you are inherently leaning towards authoritarianism. You can't take my labor, my money, my land and redistribute it or whatever without the monopoly of violent force.
Exactly.
By a group of people against an individual or a smaller group of individuals. Like there's no way around that.
Yeah. Most people are not going to willingly give up their stuff and give away their labor to get nothing particularly in return.
Correct. I mean, maybe from a spiritual perspective, you could make some of that kind of work if you can get people's altruism going. But the state isn't really good at that. The state is not asking for your altruism. They are demanding it. And just the concept of you demanding anything from me already makes me mad. Like if you walked up to me on the street and there was something I want, hey man, could you spare $1 for, the homeless guy on the street? I might. Yeah. I might if I feel so inclined, or buy him a sandwich. But if you walked up to me and said, hey man, you need to give your money to this guy. Oh bro. Oh man.
Yeah.
Look, I'm gonna go get a sandwich and I'm gonna eat it in your face.
Yep.
That's how that works.
And that I think is the most important point in all of this is Marxists, communists, these leftists do not understand the fundamental truth of human nature. And I don't know if it's their godlessness that causes that. I don't know how you cannot understand how human beings operate.
Yeah.
But I can tell you how we operate here at Of the People. We look for your donations, your support. So make sure you like this video, share this video, subscribe to our channel. And remember, subscribing does not cost you anything. It is free. It is absolutely free, but it tells the big tech overlords that you like our stuff and that they should share it with more people.
Best things in life are free.
The best things in life are free.
Or horribly expensive.
You get me some Janet Jackson, I'm all day. Okay? Yep. All day. But what's not all day is this show. So make sure you come back next week. Robert will be back. We'll be in studio bringing you some new information. Maybe we'll even have a new guest.
And tell them how well we did.
All right.
Okay?
All right. See you guys.